Alrighty, we are now live on YouTube. That's right, we're live on Cyborg Alpha TV now. Come in, I'm Dr. Dan Karras. This is Talk Live, but this is not a standard talk program. This program does go for about 3 hours. It's broken up into 3 different segments. So we do an hour here on YouTube, on my YouTube channel on Cyborg Alpha TV. We do an hour on YouNow. That's you, and it's younow.com/CyborgAlpha. We do an hour there live, and then after that we go to Twitcasting. That's US. Twitcasting. That's twitcasting.tv/cyborg_alpha, and then we're there for another hour, typically. And I say typically because if the discussion at the last segment, if the discussion is vibrant, if it is going on, if there is a reason to stay beyond the 3 hours, we do that. We extend our time, because it is at the end of the broadcast anyway, so we can extend our time at the end of the broadcast, at the end of the show, if we need to or if we want to. So this is not a standard format show, although we are doing Talk Live. I am not a pundit. I am not a host, if you will. I am a scientist. I'm a researcher, and I'm bringing you the research that I've been working on that may be of interest to others. And I'm trying to bring this in a more palatable format. Research is rather long. It takes years to work on. It's not something that occurs overnight. It's not something that's relatively short. And I mean, this is what kind of I looked at. Things like PBS, and there are a lot of channels now on YouTube who are doing so-called science. And someone will get up in front of a camera and do a nice little blurb for about 5 to 10 minutes and tell you, well, this is what you need to know. Well, you know what? This isn't that. This is not. I'm not aiming at textbooks. I'm not aiming to support the education system. This is not in terms of public education aimed at high school or we call it general science or general education programs in the first and second year program. In the first and second year university, these programs are most of the programs, most of the courses are all pretty much general. There's not much specifics you get into in the first and second year. It's primarily all introductory, and so it's not until you actually choose your major, or if you want to specialize in your major, that you get into what we're talking about. We are beyond the first and second year. We are into, if you have chosen a major, this is the level of academics we're at. Now, this does not mean we're going to lock everybody out and say only those who are second year and beyond, only those who have chosen the major. You're welcome. Everybody else who doesn't have a major, goodbye. The goal is to make the topics here accessible to everybody, to allow people who don't necessarily have an understanding or don't have a university background to come in and hang out and listen to what's going on and hear some of the information and question. And that's the thing. At the sort of the second, at this level, it's not about listening to what I say. It's about the research. It's about finding the information. It's about going out and developing an understanding, and pretty much on your own, and using what I say here as a guide, as opposed to me being the instructor and you as a dutiful student simply listening. So, as I said, you're free to have your own opinions. You're free to have your own thoughts. I encourage you to sort of comment. It doesn't matter whether the comments are positive or negative. If you have something to say it. If you have questions, don't be afraid to ask as well. I will be in the comments a lot. I don't answer the comments within the comments. I answer comments that are left for the video here. So if you've commented on one of the videos, for the Talk Live videos, you will see your answer, the response to your comment here, as opposed to being down in the comment. And that being the case, let's get on with it, because what we're going to do tonight in the beginning is look at somebody's comment. I had a person here, and I'll give you the name. I'll give it out as a text. Let's see here. Is Jeremy Hayner, I think it is. I think he's got his account has no picture. There's no information on it. It's pretty much a dead account. I'll post the information here. It's also in the description of the video. So that's his information right here. I posted I posted that in the video itself, the description of this video here. So you can go take a look at his link. You can see there's nothing there. There's no picture. There's no information. He's got a YouTube channel, but again, the YouTube channel doesn't have much of anything. So there's no way to qualify what he says in terms of where his education levels are, but I think we can sort of gather from what he says where the situation is here. And it says, why do you allow the meaning of the word physics to evolve, but not that of atheism? And then he goes on to explain, because he's, you know, this is the question that's not simply asking the question, but rather it's a rhetorical question where he's going to answer it himself. He says physics grew out of its absolute phase into a probabilistic one, but it never needed a new label. We continuously adjust the meaning to encompass our evolved understanding. We can always slap on a modifier. And he gives an example of classical physics in order to talk about earlier phases. Atheism may have had an absolute no gods period phase, but there is no law preventing its evolution. It seems to have grown. It seems to have grown into all the claims that have been put forth. It seems to have grown into, and then in quotations, all the claims that have been put forth for a God existing have been unconvincing. Okay. To recap, absolute atheism was compatible with classical physics, but not with probabilistic physics. Whereas, and again, no period, but just a comma here. Whereas unconvinced atheism isn't compatible with both. Well, is compatible. I should say. Whereas unconvinced atheism is compatible with both. Physics didn't die with classical physics. Atheism didn't die with absolute atheism, and that was his view on things. Slight problem here. Unconvinced atheism. There is no such thing as unconvinced atheism. To understand the term atheism, you have to go into the ancient Greek. You have to go into Greek. It's a Greek term, and unfortunately, a large chunk of the terms that are used are Greek, whether we like it or not. That's sort of our central point here. So you really do have to, if you're going to go into the semantics of words and what words mean and how they're defined, then you do have to go into the roots of our language. The roots of our language is Latin. The French language, it has 95% of its roots, or 95% of the French language is Latin. A large chunk, or most of Latin, is Greek. And that means if you want to go back to the beginning, you need to go back to the Greek. And in this case here, we're talking about atheism. And atheism is a Greek term that means no God. If you're unconvinced, if you're an unconvinced atheist, you're not sure there's a God or not, right? You're in we'll call null in physics we'd call this a null space. You're in no place particular. You're neutral to a certain degree. Then you're an agnostic, not an atheist. You're an agnostic. So the unconvinced atheism is actually agnosticism. It's the not knowing whether there's a God or gods or God. In other words, the theism for an agnostic remains undefined and open. It's only when you have a specific definition in theism, and theism is the, if you will, the science of defining God. Theism, like any other ism, is a philosophy. Philosophy is a construct of different thoughts and ideas, and typically definitions, particularly longer definitions, things that do not come together simply, and also the definitions are not finished, they're not finite, they're not absolute. They require some degree of belief. In other words, you cannot prove an ism absolutely. You can only understand it and prove it to a certain degree, and the rest remains in belief. In other words, this is how religions form. It's the practice of what you believe. Again, we're going into these definitions here. These definitions are important because you'll find out there are people use religion for a variety of different in a variety of different ways. And this is the problem: when words are used in a variety of different ways, you do have to define how they're used in this particular context here. And one of the problems that we ran into with physics in terms of the evolution of the term physics, and I think it's not that the word physics evolved, but the physics itself evolved. It changed. And that's evolving simply means to change. If you're in one form and then you move to another form over a period of steps. And we are going to go into this. We're going to go into the evolution of physics. We're going to go into a large chunk of this stuff. But again, we're not doing a 5-minute program. We're not trying to explain this in 5 minutes. We're not doing the textbook stuff. We're going in depth. We're going into these discussions. Next year, this stuff is going to get monumentally harder because we are going to bring. I am going to be bringing in calculus, and I'm going to be doing some of the heavier mathematics involved in quantum mechanics and quantum physics. So there is going to be, as we move on, an increase in not only our depth, but the complexity of what we're talking about. So that's where in many cases I think I'll end up losing a lot of people, because once you get into the mathematics, once you get into the calculus, and into the sort of the deep ends of quantum mechanics, that's when you start losing people. That's when people start falling off the wagon, because you're not dealing with something very simple anymore. You're now getting to you're getting into a very complex area, and most people kind of fall off the wagon and say, well, this kind of isn't for me. So the thing is that, the word really didn't, the word physics doesn't evolve. And this is where the problem is. It actually doesn't evolve itself. And the thing is, there are other contexts to this word here, the word of physics evolves. And that is the problem. It hasn't. The world itself hasn't evolved. Just because physics itself, and physics simply means nature. Physics is, again, a Greek word. It simply means nature. So a physicist is the person who studies nature. And there's no specific definition on nature. It could be any nature of the nature of the universe. It can be nature of atoms, the nature of whatever. And it's not defined as if you're studying biology. And again, biology is a Greek word. Unfortunately, actually, biology is 2 Greek words. It's bio, which is basically life, and the logy part. Well, biology, the logy part, is loyi, and loyi stands for word. It stands for study. There's a whole Greek understanding behind it, and you can actually do an entire study on the word loyi and logi itself. Loyi and logi itself provide an interesting tangent to our discussions here. But when talking about physics and and so on and so forth. So it says atheism may have had an absolute phase, and the thing is, it didn't. It's not that atheism had an absolute phase; it still does. There are atheists out there who will come out and state that atheism is not a religion, that atheism is based on scientific fact. There are science shows out there, most of them aimed at high school and the general science programs at university. Again, your first and second year where the courses are pretty much general. You haven't chosen your major yet. You're pre-this, you're pre-that. And it's not until you get into the more complex areas of your studies, not until you get into your major, that you begin to understand that a large chunk of what you were taught in school was very generalized, and that it missed and did not include a lot of important specifics that really changes your perspective on how you saw and how you see what you were taught when you were younger. And the thing is if you are a younger person watching this, over a period of time, if you continue watching this, in other words, you haven't gone past your second year, if a person hasn't gone past your second year, there's going to be a lot of things that challenge the way you see things. This is going to, if I do my job right and sort of bring out enough of this information in the right way, that you will be able to see that there are differences in differences in the way you see things, depending on the information that you have in front of you. I'll give you an example. Take two people arguing about a particular object that they've experienced. One person is deaf, right, and the other person is blind. Right? The person who is deaf can only see the object, and the person who is blind can only hear the object. And objects sometimes do make noises, or you can touch and feel it. So they both can argue, but the problem is, because you cannot give someone else your experience, what you see and how you see it, in terms of your limitations and capacities, affects what you understand about the object that you're looking at, or the object that you're experiencing. So you can say that to a certain degree on both sides they're going to be right, and again, to a certain degree on both sides they're going to be wrong. And the limitations in terms of their arguments, and where they're right and wrong, will be defined by how they experience the object. And so, in many cases, when you're looking at these arguments here of atheism and not atheism, and agnosticism, and religion versus non-religion, you're talking about describing something that is beyond our understanding, beyond our own physical experience, and we only experience these things to such a degree that our limitations allow us to. Our limitations will only, or in terms of it's not our limitation, our capacity will allow us to. It's not the limit, because limitations stop limitations is what define the capacity. Where your limit is into what you can actually know, what you can actually experience, that's your capacity. That's your capacity there. That's your capacity to learn. And the thing is, your capacity to experience, your capacity to learn what you've seen, what you understand, is not a finite thing either. It's something that can be moved. You can move it forward and you can move it backwards. It's the matter of whether or not you can find a way to get past your own ego. And this is what the challenge is. The limitations in many cases, in terms of our capacity to understand, is our own ego. It's our own self. We become the obstacle. We become the limitation. And Buddha understands this. If you look at Buddhism, not particularly, I'm not saying look. Let me correct this again here. Instead of looking at Buddhism, look at Buddha. Go back sorry about that. Find the documents on Buddha. And there are documents on Buddha. There's actually movies from India, old movies from India about Buddha. And this is the Indian prince, not the religion that grew out of it later on. And he talks about the path to enlightenment, the path to understanding. And he describes that we ourselves become an obstacle. We become our own limitations in this sort of, if you will, a quest to understand. And there are exercises, and these are the meditations. The exercises are the meditations to overcome our own self, to diminish our own self, so that we can have a wider view of what's around us. You know, a better, I should say, a unclouded view of what's around us. And this is something important to remember, because this actually goes into theism. It evolves eventually into religion. As I said, religion is the practice of theism. Theism is the definition of God or not God, or however you want to define God. Religion is the practice of the theism. So you have a situation in atheism. Atheism has never been proven. The fundamentals under which it evolved and grew out, that science was truth. There was scientific truth. Now that this truth has come into question because of what's going on in quantum mechanics and quantum physics, that there is a limit on our knowledge. The scientific truth that atheism was based on is no longer there. It's just, that's the whole thing. It's simply no longer there. And so, as its claim diminishes, the scientific truth, atheism moves back to what it's defined as. Atheism is a theism that states and believes, in this case, believes that there is no God. And so what happens is that you're still within atheism. It is now, instead of being convinced, or instead of having the ability to rely back on science again, you have to deal with the fact that you're now back into an ism, you're back into a theism, you're back, and if you're practicing this theism, you're practicing a religion. Again, any theism that you practice, including atheism, is your religion. Right? That's kind of the way it is. If you do something ritualistically over and over again, let's say you're a rabid sports fan and you watch more. Let's say you call yourself, and then do this in a comparison. Like we do this in using a comparison. A person calls themselves a Christian and say, "I am a Christian. I believe in God." And he defines his God to be along the Christian line, and says, "This is my religion." However, let's take a look, and he says, "I don't have to go to church. I don't have to say my prayers. I don't have to fast. I don't have to do much of anything. God is simply going to be in the background, and I spend most of my days. I spend my Sundays on the couch watching TV." In terms of my sports, more attentive to my sports programs, and I know more about the sports than I do know about Christianity. Guess what? Your religion is no longer Christianity. Your religion is the sports. Again, as I said, the religion that you have is what you practice. If you don't practice something, then it's not your religion. That's as simple as it gets. Or I should say, that's as far as it goes. And the thing is that all the claims that have been put forth for a God existing have been unconvincing. It's not a matter of convincing. And this is what I said before. And I don't know if you watch what I talked about earlier in the last video. I don't know whether he understood what I was talking about or not. Because if he was looking at this from the perspective that was putting forth an argument for the existence of God. I wasn't. I was simply looking at the evidence and what the evidence was suggesting. And this is not trying to convince somebody of something. This is sort of simply, well, this is what the evidence is starting to show. It's starting to show that 95% of the universe is unknown and undefined. That's dark matter and dark energy. You can find this in any science textbook now about dark energy and dark matter. You can find, in terms of an analog to dark energy and dark matter, you can find, depending on the textbook, really depending on the textbook, you can find notes and information on black holes and their influence on the structure of the surrounding environment. And the black hole is, as it's defined, it's a black hole. We can't see it, we can't detect it. There's no way of detecting a black hole. The only way we know a black hole is there, and if you go in and watch you go in and read the research papers, you watch the colloquia, and that's what physicists do and researchers do. They'll come out, they'll give a colloquia, they'll give a speech, they'll give a lecture on about the stuff they're researching on. This is kind of like a colloquia anyway. So, except it's just me, and I'm trying to, rather than keeping it for professors and researchers, I'm opening it up to the public, and everybody in the public can sort of take can tag along and participate in this. So, it's kind of, if you will, an open colloquia. It's not closed off to a group of scientists or specific to peer review. Most peer review magazines and journals where scientists do post their reports, do post a large chunk of their notes, they're closed off to the general public, and you'll more often than not never see the reports in something like the journal Science. The journal Science is rather expensive. I don't know how. I don't know. It's not that easy to get the journal Science on the standard magazine rack. You have to either go into a larger bookstore or something like that to get it. But it's not really an off-the-shelf type of magazine. It's aimed as a science journal. It is a science journal, and it's aimed the target audience are scientists. There are other researchers who understand laboratory reports, who know what a laboratory report are, and how they're structured, and how the information that you are working on is presented in these reports. If you understand that, then this is how you understand the journal Science. And there's also the journal Nature, and of course these are your general journals for science. There are more specific journals for a variety of different areas and fields, and the specific areas, more focused areas in science as well, depending on the research that you're doing. Almost every research area has its own journal. So, it's not, this isn't closed off, and it's not specific. It's trying to deal with this as much as possible. Trying to bring sort of this research stuff, this post second year beginning in research. We're trying to bring it to a younger audience. We're trying to get it down to as young as 14, 15. But if you're as young as 14, 15, even younger than that, it's going to be a struggle. It's not going to be an easy thing. It took me. I've been doing this now for 25 years. I'm still not as good as many other physicists out there. I would not compare myself necessarily to some of these other very good physicists who have spent longer than I have in there. I'm not specifically in any one area. So again, if there's a scientist who's in a specific area, they'll know more about the specific area than I do. I have more of an overview of things rather than the specifics, and I still have to, as I go along with my research, build in some of these specifics. So, and that's why it's not an issue of convincing or not convincing. It's sort of it's not a convincing or not. It's not a convincing or an unconvincing for anything particular. It's basically looking at the evidence. So of the evidence. So when you're talking about putting forth an argument for God, for the existence of God. This is very simply not the case. And so what happens is that going back to this talk about the classical physics and probabilistic physics, it's not classical physics in probabilistic physics. It's deterministic physics, deterministic science, and probabilistic physics, probabilistic science. That's where the term comes in. That's where things end up evolving. And the thing is, and it says evolving, and this is what I stated before, these are terms that I use. Well, they have a tendency to be absolute. More often than not, they are within a certain degree of understanding. Then again, they're not an absolute statement. This is what you need to be careful with. My statements are never absolute. I've been in this probabilistic environment for a very long time, so I understand that when I say something, even generally saying something, that it may appear to be absolute, but it's not absolute. There are further requirements and further definitions that will be coming later on. This is not the end of the discussion. We're still pretty much at the beginning of our discussion. There is still an enormous amount to get done. We still we have to look at Planck. I went and take a look at what Maxwell Planck had done. What type of write-up you have on Maxwell Planck, and the write-up on Maxwell Planck, even at some of the university sites, which were aimed at again, they're aimed at the general science population. They're aimed at first and second year university students, where most of the courses are general. They're not aimed at the researchers. Very pitiful. The representation even in Wikipedia is very limited. It's not until you go into the more specific things, like let's say you want to go into something known. This is again a more complex term. You go into a Hamiltonian, and a Hamiltonian is a type of mathematics developed specifically for physics to deal with the issue of potential energy and kinetic energy. And you go look up Hamiltonian, and it is something rather difficult to find. But once you do find it, they talk about Laplacians. They talk about the gradient. In other words, they're getting into vector calculus. They're getting into path integrals. And these are very complicated forms of mathematics. And I think these are the same type of mathematics they'll talk about if you're listening to lectures by researchers on the Higgs boson. They're talking about Laplacians. They're talking about Hamiltonians. They're going into quantum field theory. So, and when you're just talking about quantum field theory, you're talking about path integrals. You're talking about these various forms of mathematics. And the mathematics, you can actually get lost in the mathematics and start paying attention more to the mathematics than what's actually being said. But if you understand to a certain degree, and again, everything is not that if you understand, it's understand to a certain degree. If you understand to a certain degree the calculus, you can start putting aside the calculus for a little bit and just sit back and wait. Watch. And this is why I don't take notes during a lecture. I always either record the lecture or find some way of getting the lecture so that I have it recorded. And the first time I'm at a lecture and listening to a researcher say something, I simply listen. Because if you don't do that, there are very significant, and you're focusing on the notes, you can become so focused on the notes. As a matter of fact, you become so intently focused on the notes, in terms of keeping up, that you miss the larger picture. And this was the case here when one of the researchers was talking about the Higgs boson. He was a physicist. He was giving a lecture on the Higgs boson. He was going through a large chunk of the mathematics. He was talking about the quantum field theory. He was talking about quantum electrodynamics. He was talking about the work done by Richard Feynman. And this is another scientist. You have to go further into this to understand what I'm talking about. We have to go and look at the work of Richard Feynman. We have to look at quantum thermodynamics, quantum electrodynamics. We have to look at quantum field theory. We have to look at the work of Heinz Bethe. There's another scientist called Gamow. There's a whole host of scientists, including Oppenheimer, who worked on these particular problems. There's a whole history behind this. It's not one. It's not one science. It's not one side. There's a whole bunch of points. There are a whole bunch of specific points, details, that if you really want to answer the question, you really want to do this exploration, you have to go take a look at it. And this isn't 5 minutes. It's not. We're not even going to get done in the hour that we're talking here. This is year, 2 years, 3 years out in terms of research. It's not an easy thing. And this is the thing is, and this is one, you know, in many cases they wait till after your second year of university to find out where you're going to go. If you are going to go down the academic research path, then this is the stuff that opens up to you. If you're not going down the research and academic path, then this stuff never opens up to you because they say, well, why bother? The view is, if you're going to go out in mainstream society, you're going to go out and get a 9-to-5 job. None of this stuff ever opens up to you. It never, and you never see it, you never experience it, because they're going to give you the stuff that's designed for general society. If you're going to become part of mainstream society, the general society, and that means you're not going to become a researcher, then you're going to get only the information designed for general society. That's all you're going to get. And it's not until you go outside, until you start taking this path, down the research path. And this is the fork in the road in your second year of university. You decide, as you've been taking your introductory courses, as you take your general courses, where you want to go. Where do you want to go? Do you want to go down mainstream life, 9-to-5 job, or do you want to go down the research path? If you end up going down the research path, then it's a whole new ball game, because all of a sudden it's not a matter of giving the professor what you want out of the textbook, what he wants out of the textbook. It's about looking for and trying to understand what information is actually out there. Now, the thing is that all universities have a particular point that they have a particular a philosophy that they follow. There are specific points that they want to see in their papers. Professors are like that too. They put blinders on you and force you into a particular. Well, some do anyways. They'll force you and put blinders on you and force you into a particular direction or a particular understanding, rather than allowing the evidence itself, or allowing the research itself to dictate what you understand and what you don't understand. In other words, it's the experience that has to give you your direction in understanding and what you experience and how you experience it. This is how you do research. This is open research. And sometimes, well, more often than not, you're going to get things wrong. There's a lot of mistakes. You're going to fail at a lot of things. And it's not going to be successful, and particularly in the first 5 years when you're building your library. And that's the key to research. The key to any good research is a library. How you build your library is extremely important. And if you're going to test out quantum mechanics, and you really want to test out quantum mechanics, then you use the open exploration method, which is random. Classical science, which was deterministic, has a standard view of how you do the scientific method. The standard scientific method that is generally used, is still used today. It's a classical method, but it's still used today. It's still considered to be part of the scientific truth. I mean, if you hear anyone talk about scientific truth, they're referring back to a classical view of physics, looking back to a deterministic view of science, and they're not in a probabilistic or anti-logical universe as in quantum mechanics or string theory. In other words, they're not doing open research. They're doing more. They're adjusting their classical physics. They're adjusting their classical understanding to the new stuff that's going on, the new research that's going on. They're not out there in the open. So basically, your classical structure for your the scientific method, it's hypothesis, method, observation, then conclusion. These are your fundamental parts. You have your hypothesis because the only reason why you're doing this experiment is to test out your hypothesis. You want to prove or disprove your theory. And more often than not, you want to prove your theory. You want to prove your hypothesis. And so what happens, the method you use is extremely important to the hypothesis, because if you use the wrong method, you're not going to prove your hypothesis. You're not going to get anything. And to simply view that as a mistake, you get an F, and away you go. So they want the proof there, so that as your method proves the hypothesis, and you see this in the observation, you're going to state in the conclusion that, yes, this is scientific truth, right? That you've used the scientific method. The problem is if you're in a probabilistic universe where this really can't be said, because you're doing open exploration, and in many cases you also don't know what you're dealing with. I mean, this is why dark matter actually evolved. Dark matter came about because they were using the classical method to create a model of the universe using data from the Hubble Space Telescope. And as they were starting to sort of bring in a lot of this new information, because they were getting a lot of information, said, let's at this particular point in time go back and let's see with our new computers, with our new computer systems, and they had supercomputers, they had craze and stuff like that. They had supercomputing. Let's go back and see if we can plug these models, our mathematical models, into the computer and see what we can get out of this. Can we does our mathematical understanding meet what we see through the telescope? So they did it. They did this. They put the data in. They put the equations in, and complete catastrophe, because what they saw did not meet what they saw. What they saw on the computer simulation was not what they saw in reality through the telescope. So, well, how do we make it through this? Let's adjust our equations so that we get what we need. And this is where the Hamiltonian comes in. This is where the whole concept of integration and differential equations come in. Because it allows you to do that. It allows you to make adjustments mathematically to your models, so that you can say, okay, yeah, now we have a mathematical equation that meets or produces what we see. And what they ended up doing is, again, because you're dealing with energy in many cases, that you also have to balance your energy with mass. So because your Hamiltonians, if they're doing Hamiltonians or something like that, we're dealing with energy. You're talking about energy fields. You're talking about path integrals. You're talking about these various different forms of vector calculus. And of course, because you're dealing with energy, you're dealing with mass as well. So you're talking about a mass and energy equation. You're talking about adding mass and energy to your overall equations that give you your model. And this is how they come up with dark matter and dark energy, because as they began fudging with this model, this mathematical model, adding in these new energies, adding in these new masses to produce what they saw on the telescope. The models without this sort of adjustment to it weren't meeting what they saw on the telescope. And as they made these adjustments, they had to keep doing more in it. They kept putting more. It became larger and larger. In other words, the adjustments became larger and larger and larger until basically the end amount, even after they put the new data in from even the latest chunk of Hubble Space Telescope data, the estimate, the understanding in terms of where the model is, they need to put 95% of the universe needs to be dark energy and dark matter in order for the models to work. In other words, what they're saying is, and this goes back to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and extending this out from its mathematical understanding and specifics about the positions of electrons to a larger understanding, we bring this whole concept of quantum mechanics into a probabilistic universe where knowledge is asymptotic and only probabilistic. So we can only know knowledge. We can only know something within a certain degree of limitation. There's a limit to how much we can actually know. We can never actually know the thing absolutely. We can have an understanding. We can approach that understanding within the limit. And again, we're talking about the fundamental calculus. You have to understand what a limit is in calculus. Then you're also getting into derivations and derivatives. And that, of course, leads into integrals. So we're talking calculus here. Sorry about that. But this sort of connects you in many ways in the larger chunks of space. The large, doing well, macroscopic physics now connects with microscopic physics in the uncertainty principle. That there isn't a definite chunk to space. And so this is why you take the random walk. This is why you do what you do, because the basic structure is just not there. We don't know what's out there, and this is what was happening when he did the work on the Higgs boson. When the researcher was doing the work on the Higgs boson, he started describing the Higgs boson. He started describing the background mathematics. Basically stated that the Higgs boson, the experimental results for the Higgs boson, did not match the equation, and that the equation had to be adjusted to meet the data that they found for the Higgs boson. This was the same. This was also true for the black hole. The initial equations for black holes, as they found black hole after black hole, in research terms, we call them candidates. We don't actually call them the black hole. You're not going to hear a scientist a researcher talk about a black hole specifically. They're talking about a black hole candidate. And this is the same thing here in physics when they talk about the Higgs boson. They talk about the Higgs boson candidate. Because there is a degree of uncertainty whether or not you actually have the Higgs boson. But they're not going to come out in the news and say this. They're going to come out in the news and say, hey, we found the Higgs boson. The reason being is you can't go back to your funders, you can't go back to the people paying you to do this research and say, well, we have no idea what's going on. So the unknowledge, the certainty, the lack of knowledge is left to the researchers, but the public sees something something more finite, something that they can say, oh yeah, you know what, this was worth $50 billion. So put, forget about global warming. Let's give CERN its own nuclear power plant. Let's give it an entire electric system that would be used for a city. Let's use it on there, even though we're talking about global warming and stuff like that. Yeah, it's important. But to find this Higgs boson, that $50 billion, even though, yeah, we're talking about there's people starving to death in the world, that's a good cause. And so what people will say, okay, great. They say, oh, there are a lot of spin-off benefits to this. And this is what appears in the public. What appears to the researchers is something completely different. And so what happens, the researcher now, they're not upset that this is what's happened. I think in many cases, this is what you should have expected. I mean, because this is what's been happening all along. Every time you go into an experiment and do these what we call open exploration experiments, you don't get a finite answer. What you do is you get some degree of answer, but there's always questions, more questions later on that have to be answered. And as you start looking at them and the results of the experiment, more puzzles, more questions pop up than you actually have answers. So in other words, you end up with every experimentation, in terms of where your knowledge is, in terms of what your overall understanding is, you end up further behind in the total sum of things than before the experiment. So in other words, every experiment, always open exploration as you go out and sort of find things, do that random walk. Because it expands your horizon, expands your view, your overall understanding of that view diminishes, because even if it stays the same, typically, if something what you have stays the same, but the area around it grows, in comparison to the larger growth of that area, in terms of that new larger area, you now have that thing is small, is less than what you had before in terms of a percentage of that area. And this is sort of how you built this. Talking about the library, if you're going into research, you can go down the standard path, or you can and use that sort of the scientific method, and only seek to prove what you know, or you can toss off the hypothesis and the conclusion and simply go with method and observation and go into open exploration. Open exploration is just this. You pick a point, you start there, and as you go out and collect more information and or whatever you're going to collect as your evidence or experience, bring it back, pile it up, and as you get enough stuff, you start organizing it, you go back out again, and you repeat that same method over and over again. And that's how everything grows. This is how your library goes. The base library that takes you about 5 years to build, and it does take about 5 years to build a good base library. It's like, if you haven't built a good base library yet, you're listening to this and you say, oh, this is interesting, I definitely do want to do this research, then your first 5 years is going to be building the base library. It's 6 years doing very basic structural work and learning what libraries are and what different information is possibly out there. And then it's a further 6 years to really start getting, it's 6 months getting the concept through and getting used to the concept of doing open exploration to build a library, and then in sort of getting your general feel for things. And then as a further 6 months before you really start seeing your first collection come together. And again, it's your first collection because it's going to be small, it's going to be minute, it's not necessarily going to be anything impressive. And year after year, well, yeah, year after year, for the next 5 years, you're going to be evolving and adjusting this library. And hopefully, if you do your research right, depending on how much time you spend on your research, and you're not going to start off the way I am right now. I'm right now 25 years on. I'm doing 12 hours of research a day. You're not going to start like that. You're going to start maybe 2-3 hours tops. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to get tired. And more often than not, after 2-3 hours of reading and studying, to sort of figure out what you want to put in your library, you're going to get exhausted, and you're going to go take a nap, and you have something to eat, and that will be it. So that's going to be the extent of your research. The first few years is you're not going to be putting a lot of time in there. There's going to be a lot of time dealing with the goof-off problem. Everybody has a goof-off problem. All you have to do is go take a look at any. Go into an office and take a look at it on any person's desk. More often than not, they're playing solitaire on the computer, or some other type of game. The amount of time during the day that is, let's put it using these terms, dedicated to goofing off, is more significant than the actual amount of work that you do get done. And this is certainly true in the beginning. And what you have to do is, and this is what I've talked about, I talk about this in my BTS vlogs, and you hear me talking about this over and over again, working on my efficiency models. And my efficiency models is in the amount of time that I have, the capacity that I have to sit here and do this work, how effective can I be? Because I know there's going to be a lot of downtime. There's going to be sick time. There's times when I'm sick. There's time when the computers aren't behaving properly. There are errors that will pop into the system. You could lose an entire hard drive. What happens if you build your library, and all of a sudden the hard drive and or the thumb drive you built your library on either is lost, you can't find it anymore, lost it someplace because you didn't back it up, or you don't have a parallel or backup library that you keep in a safe place. So let's say you lose it, or it gets damaged. Then what? Then what do you do? I mean, 2 years in, you've done 2 years worth of research, and all of a sudden, 2 years of research, all the information you collected is gone. And you, in many cases, have to start all over again. And it's not that you actually have to start all over again, because as long as you've done the work and you've had your experiences, rebuilding what you had is actually going to be easier because now you have experience where before in the beginning you didn't have experience. And this was certainly true for myself just over Christmas. I had a major catastrophe on my network that has forced me to completely reconfigure the entire network here. My Linux network is being reconfigured, and it's taken me more than 6 months to do it. It's an enormous project. And of course, I was thinking about all the stuff I lost. But I said to myself, you know, it takes you a couple of days to sort of calm yourself down, to think about things, to get your mind back in order again. And for me, my meditation, my prayer meditations, help me with this. And you're able to bring yourself to a point where, you know what, I know what I lost. I know exactly what I lost because I have experienced it, and I can go back out and I can find it again. And this time it's not going to take me as much time to find what I want, because the first time I had no idea what I was looking for. In other words, when you go out and to replace something, you're going out and looking for something you had already found. So you're not looking for something new. It's not as difficult as looking for something new. So it's not much of a problem. And ironically enough, as I went back and started rebuilding parts of the library that was damaged, and that was about just about 2 terabytes worth of information. That's about 2,000 gigabytes worth of information was lost. My library is now about 7 terabytes in size. I lost 2, so now I lost, you know, I lost a good chunk, but still, rebuilding it again has taught me some new things. I've learned some new things. I've gained some new experiences. I found and realized things, because sometimes when you go back over and take a second look at something, you understand things better from the second time or from another perspective as compared to when you first initially looked at things. I found notes in bits and pieces of information that I forgot I had, you know. So it's not. This is some, you know, talking about this. You know, if you don't understand something, or if you feel that it's getting over your head, don't worry about it. And that's it. We're going to be here for a while. This is not something that's short. This is not something that's quick. It's not the 5 minutes. We're not doing a 5 minutes like the sci show. This isn't a sci show. I'm not Dan the guy. I'm not Dan the science guy. I'm Dr. Dan Karras. I'm a researcher. I'm a scientist. I'm a physicist. And I do open exploration. I allow the environment, I allow the research that I experience to dictate where I'm going and dictate what my experiences are. And that's how I build my theories. My theories come from that. It's not an issue of convincing or not convincing. It's all that I think. If something that you're looking at is going to be true, no matter what it is, including your religion, then the evidence, the scientific evidence, the research, it's going to be there. You'll see it. Even if you don't see it initially, it's going to be there. You know. So if you are doing something, and this is again coming from experience, I know that if I understand something to be true, that it will prove itself to be true within the evidence that as I go forward and I do this open research, that evidence will pop up. And in fact, this has been the case, and the evidence has popped up in a variety of unusual ways, in ways that I could never have predicted. So, you know, it's not about convincing. It's not about proof. It's about research. It is about the evidence and allowing the evidence to dictate your theory rather than having theory dictate what your evidence is. And as it, many of the physicists today, and you'll see this, are still using the classical method. The classical method and deterministic physics is still the common view. It's still, it hasn't been replaced. It's only the uncommon view, the probabilistic universe, is only been replaced by those who are actually looking at quantum physics, those who are actually working on superstring theory, some of the more advanced researchers. That's the only place it's been replaced. Otherwise, you know, the common view is the old science. It's the classical science. It's classical physics. And because it's today, they call it modern, they call it current physics and stuff like that, but it, you know, it's not. So that's why you have to differentiate between the physics. And of course, once you do start differentiating amongst the physics and sort of, you know, go beyond what you see in public, in the public eye, and sort of present it to the public for consumption, then your understanding of atheism has to change as well. To go from something that's absolute to back to what it is. It's a theism. It's a form of belief. It's a form of religion. If you practice that, you know, if you practice what you believe, then it's religion, right? Anything you practice in a ritualistic fashion, where it's there is a routine to it and a belief behind it, that's your religion. So, anyways, I thank Jeremy for his comments. If any of you who are watching or are going to watch this video have comments of your own, feel free to leave them. I will answer your comments in the exact same way I answered Jeremy's within a video. I mean, that's the YouTube thing. That's the YouTube thing to do. We have this venue here. So, my name is Dr. Daniel Karras. You're watching Talk Live on Cyborg Alpha TV. It is now 11 o'clock. That means we have to go over to you now. Yeah, for our second segment, for our second hour, we're going over to you now. We'll see you over there. Have a good one, and follow me over there to you now for the second hour. On the third hour, we're going to be on Twitcasting, and if we have a good conversation over there, we're going to extend the time. We'll go a little bit longer and deal with things from there on out. Anyways, good night.